Hi everybody, welcome to my presentation on markup and margin. This presentation will go through how to work out the markup and margin on cost of sales and selling price and take you through the steps of the different types of calculations plus what it actually means and hopefully an easy way for you to remember them. Just before we get started, a quick introduction to myself. I'm AAT qualified, studied level 2, 3 and 4. I'm currently working in finance and have been now for 2 years, but my ultimate ambition is to train to teach AAT in the future. The presentations that I do are just about the key concepts of AAT and they're designed to support the fundamentals that will help you progress through levels 2, 3 and 4. I'm not endorsed by AAT and these materials are my own. I hope these help and prove to be beneficial, and good luck, and most of all enjoy the journey that is AAT. So what is markup and margin? So the underlying meaning is that both markup and margin are different ways of calculating and presenting profit. The difference between the two is that one is based on the cost price of the product and one is based on the selling price of the product. And this is the key difference to understand when you're talking about markup and margin, or you're reading a question about markup and margin, is you need to understand which is which and what is linked to markup, what is linked to margin. Once you understand that, being able to interpret questions and use the figures in the question will become much easier for you. So what's my way of remembering them? So there's 2 letters in each word, and we're going to break this down shortly on the next couple of slides. But the key thing for me when I was learning markup and margin was that it's markup and margin. Okay, so up and in are the 2 words that really we want to be focusing on understanding the difference between the 2. So let's go into a little bit more detail about this. So let's take a look then at markup and what markup means. So first of all, let's start with the formula on how you work it out. So markup is equal to gross profit divided by cost of sales times 100%, because that will then give you your percentage. Okay, so the key word here is up, and why that is because a markup is based on cost of sales. So the cost price of your product that you're selling, you then need to mark up to the selling price. Okay, so because it's based on the cost price, we're always going to be going up to the selling price. So just a little diagram here is because when you price a product for manufacture, you're then going to you're going to go up to the selling price. So I always think about selling price and cost price and the difference between the 2, because you need to step up. So markup is based on the cost price because you step up to the selling price. So the next one, margin. Let's have a look at what's involved in margin. So the formula for margin is margin equals gross profit divided by sales times 100%, which gives you the percentage. The key word is in, and it's based on the selling price of the product. Now, to explain this one and why the key word is in, I'm just going to bring up a little diagram that I kind of drew out when I was first thinking about margin and markup and trying to get my head around it. So we have our selling price, and the way I like to think of the selling price is that it has to include a number of things. To get to the selling price, you have to include a number of things. You've got your cost of sales, and you've got your gross profit. So those, whatever your product costs, plus whatever you're making, whatever your profit is on that, will then equal how much you're going to sell that product for. So the way I like to think about it is that for margin, it means that the cost of sales is going in and the gross profit is going in. So therefore, if you're using sales in your formula, then you must be using the margin. So in means everything in. So cost of sales is in, your gross profit is in, and that makes up your selling price. So therefore you base it on sales. So let's have a look at these side by side, and hopefully it will then start to make sense. So the formulae. You've got markup, margin. Markup is gross profit divided by cost of sales times 100, and margin equals gross profit divided by sales times 100. So going back to what we were talking about on the last couple of slides, is the key words help identify the formula to use. So mark up means you need to go up from something, therefore you need to use the cost of sales, because we're going to step up from the cost of sales to the selling price. And the margin, the in bit, means everything's all in there. So the sales price includes your cost of sales and your gross profit. So if you're talking about margin, then you need to use the sales figure. Okay, so let's have a little look at just a very basic question on which will just show you how to substitute the values into the formula and how to kind of look at it. A bit later on we'll go on to some more in-depth and longer questions that will need you to work out a few more elements before you can actually work out what the figures that the question's asking you for. So a trader makes a gross profit of £2,500 on £30,000 worth of sales with items that cost £27,500. What is the markup and what is the gross profit margin? So first of all, let's bring up the markup formula. So let's have a quick look here. Your markup, there's your key word, because you're going to be going up. Okay, so you're going up to the selling price from your cost of sales. Okay, so you're going to be basing it on your cost of sales price. So we know that our gross profit is £2,500. We want to divide that by our cost of sales. Here it is here. And then we multiply by 100, and that gives us a markup of 9.09%, which is just rounded to 2 decimal places. So the other one then, margin, so that's the key word there. And remember I had on the previous slide I had a little box, and we had the cost of sales going into it, and we had the gross profit going into it, and that's what made up our sales price. So everything's going into the box, so it means we're going to be basing it on our sales price. So the formula then will be £2,500, which is our gross profit, divided by 30,000, which is our sales from the question here, times by 100, and that equals 8.33%, again to 2 decimal places. So hopefully that shows you that you'll get different percentages using the different formulae, and also how to kind of stop, take a breath first of all, have a look at markup, think up, you're going from cost of sales to the selling price, so you need to base it on your cost of sales, or margin, so you've got in, everything's all in, so therefore you're going to base it on your sales price. Okay, so one more then, just one for you to have a go. A business makes a gross profit of £400 on the total sales of specialist mirrors. It had total sales of £1,560 and costs of £1,160. What is the markup and what is the gross profit margin? So give the video a pause and have a go at doing this question. Okay, so let's have a look at the question then and just work it through quickly. So here's our question. The business makes a gross profit of £400 on the total sales of specialist mirrors. The total sales were £1,560 with costs of £1,160. What is the markup and what is the gross profit margin? So our markup then, so remember we're going to be doing going up, there's our keyword. So we're going to be going up from our cost of sales. So we're basing it on cost of sales. So our gross profit is 400 divided by 1160, which is our cost over here. And then we're going to times that by 100. And that equals 34.48% to 2 decimal places. And bring up our margin here. So again, we've got our keyword here in. Remember our little box where everything goes into it. So you're going to put everything in. So therefore you're basing it on your sales price. So there's your gross profit again of 400. Divide that by 1,560 and multiply it by 100, and that gives you a gross profit margin of 25.64%. So hopefully those two examples then just give you sort of an idea on how the formula is used in sort of a simple question like this. We're going to go on to a little bit more explanation, and then we'll go on to some longer questions that perhaps you might find crop up, the type of style of question that you might find crop up in the exam a little bit more. Okay, the next thing we need to focus on here is understanding what makes up 100% when you're given a question. It's nice and easy if you're given a sales figure and you're given the cost of sales figure, you're given the gross profit, you can work out what your markup or your margin percentage is. But what if you're not given all of those figures and all you're told is a sales price or a cost of sales price with a markup or margin percentage, and you have to work out the missing one? So in order to do that, you need to understand what 100% is. So markup and margin will indicate what element is equal to 100%. So it sounds a little bit confusing to start with, but we're going to work through a couple of examples in a second, which will hopefully make it a bit clearer for you. So starting with markup. So markup means that it's the cost of sales figure that equals 100%. So going back to what we started with in the beginning in order how to identify markup and margin and what figure to use, this is where we can then easily apply that to understand what makes up 100%. So beforehand, we were talking about how markup is going up from the cost of sales price to the sales price. So your base there, what you're basing it on, is your cost of sales. So as you're basing it on your cost of sales, you need to take the cost of sales figure to equal 100%. So this means that if you're given a cost of sales figure and you're given a markup percentage, then you can say that your sales price is going to be your 100%, because that's going to be your cost of sales, plus your markup, and that equals your sales price. So let's look at this here. We've got cost of sales given to us, of 150,000. We're given a markup of 10%. So the markup here tells us that we need to add on 10% to the cost of sales of 150,000 to reach our sales price. So looking at it in terms of percentages, cost of sales here will equal 100%. We're going to add on our markup of 10%, which then gives us our sales price. So our sales price is worth 110% of the cost of sales. So we're going to work this through and then we're going to prove our workings. So first of all, we need to work out what 110% of the cost of sales is. There's two ways you can do this. I prefer to work in decimals, which is the way that I'm going to show you on screen. But you can, if you want to, work out what 10% is of the cost of sales and add that on, and that will give you your sales price. The way I prefer to work is I would do 150,000 multiplied by 1.10, and this 1.10 is 110% in decimal form, and then that will give you a sales figure of £165,000. Okay, so that becomes your cost of sales. So your sales figure, which is then your 110%. Okay, so let's just walk through that again. We've got our cost of sales here of 150,000. We have got a markup here. Just going to get the pointer out, of 10%, which means our sales price has to be our cost of sales plus our markup, which will equal 110%. So it's 100 plus 10 is 110%. So 150,000, which was our cost of sales, times 1.10, which is 110% in decimal form, equals 165,000, which equals our sales price. So now let's prove that by working it backwards. So if we now work out what the gross profit is, if we know that 150,000 is our cost of sales and we know that our total sales is 165,000, then our gross profit is going to be, put GP here, is going to be 165,000 minus 150,000, and that equals 15,000. So if we then put that into our formula that we've already learnt to work up what markup is, so markup, we're going up from cost of sales, so we base it on cost of sales. So we do the gross profit, which is 15,000. We divide that by our cost of sales and multiply it by 100, which will give you 10%. And then that 10% proves your markup value here. So let's work this out then for margin. When you're working with margin, if you're given a margin percentage, you then need to take that the sales figure equals 100%. So this time we're changing which figure it is that we take as 100%. So we then need to work out, if we're given our sales figure and we're given our margin, we can work out what the cost of sales figure is for that. So our cost of sales is going to be the sales figure, which is 100%, less the margin on it, which in my little example here is 15%. So the cost of sales value is 85%. So we can work out from the sales value and the margin how much the cost of sales is. So let's work this little example through like we have done above. And we'll then prove it as well. So like we have done here up with the 10%, so we can prove our margin again. So to do the margin figure, we need to work out what 85% is of the sales price, and that will give us our cost of sales value. So again, I'm going to work in decimals. You can, if you want, divide it by 100, times it by 85. So we've got 200 times that by 85%, which will give you 170. So that tells us then that this equals our cost of sales. So then we need to prove what we've just done. So we can prove that by saying if we know what our sales price is and we know what our cost of sales price is, then we can work out what our gross profit is. So our gross profit will equal 200 minus 170, which equals 30. Now to work out what our margin is, we need to use the other formula that we've been talking about, and we want to then do 30, our gross profit, divided by, we're using margin, so remember it's all in, so we're using the sales price. We're going to divide it by 200, times it by 100, and that will bring you out at a margin of 15%. So just to recap on that, we started off with a sales price of £200, which we are taking to equal 100%. We're told that the margin is 15%, so we need to work out what our cost of sales is. So our cost of sales is going to equal the sales, which is 100%, less what our margin is. So our cost of sales actually equals 85% of this £200. So putting that into a calculation, you've got 200 here, multiplied by the 85%, and that gives you 170, which equals your cost of sales. So as I said earlier, the 0.85 here is just my preference of working in decimals, but that is the equivalent of dividing 200 by 100 and times it by 85. Once we've got our cost of sale figure, we can then work backwards and actually prove what we've done. So our gross profit then equals 200 sales minus 170 cost of sales equals 30. Put it into our formula over here, which if I bring the formulae up at the bottom, is then your gross profit, 30, divided by your sales, 200, times 100 equals 15, and that 15% is the margin that we were using earlier. So you can then prove that your figures are correct. As we work through a couple of examples, this will come into play a little bit more and hopefully start to make some sense. So let's just run through just a couple of questions so you can work out what the percentages are that you're working with. So a business has a gross profit margin of 25%. What percentage does the cost of sales represent? So because we're working here with margin and we're given 25%, we have to take that this margin means that sales equals 100%, and that comes from it's all in, so we're basing it on sales. So if our sales are 100%, and we need to work out what our cost of sales represent, we're going to be doing 100% minus the margin that we're given, which is 25, which means our cost of sales is going to equal 75% of whatever value we're given. So likewise, on the opposite side of this, we've got a business here has a markup of 35%. So what percentage does the sales represent? So the markup, remember, we're looking at up here, so we're going up to the sales price, means that cost of sales equals 100%. So we need to add it on. So we need to say 100%, we're marking it up, so we're plus 35% equals 135%, which will equal sales. So let's put these in. So let's put that into practice then on some slightly longer questions. A trader operates with a gross sales margin of 22% and made sales of 108,500 in the year ending 31st of December 2017. Calculate the cost of goods sold. You can ignore VAT. So the key things we're going to pull out of here is that we have a margin of 22% and our sales figure is 108,500, and we need to calculate the cost of goods sold. So how are we going to do this? So let's go back to the start. So as we're using margin, we're given margin, we need to say that sales equals 100%. Because we're looking, everything's all in, so everything's going to be based on the sales price. So if the sales equals 100%, it means that 108,500 equals 100%, and we're given a margin of 22%. So this means cost of sales is going to equal 100% minus 22% margin. So our cost of sales is actually going to be worth 78%. So with this now, we can then work out how much our cost of sales is. So to do that, we need to work out what 78% is of the sales. So we're going to do 108,500 and we're going to times it by 78%, and that equals 84,630, and that then gives us our cost of sales figure. Now we can go and prove it again. So our gross profit equals 108,000, which is our sales, minus our cost of sales, which is now our new figure that we've just worked out, and that equals 23,870. So now that we've got our gross profit, we can put it back into the formulae that we use to work out our margins so we can prove our calculations are correct. So the margin is equal to the gross profit divided by our sales figure. So So we're going to do 23,870. We're going to divide that by our total sales figure of 108,500, and we're going to times that by 100, which then gives us a margin of 22%. So hopefully that gives you a good indication of how this works. So we had the margin means our sales equals 100%. So 108,500 equals 100%, which means our cost of sales is 100 minus the margin that we're given. So our cost of sales represents 78% of our sales price. And that's what we worked out over here. 108,500 multiplied by the 78% gives you this 84,630 over here. We've got that figure now, so we can work out our gross profit. And then once we've got our gross profit, we can put it back into the formulae that we've been learning previously, which then just proves that our margin here, 22%, is what we're given in the question. So going to bring one up on the screen here for you now. So good idea just to give the video a pause and give it a try. So a trader operates with a gross sales margin of 16%, made sales of 78,700 in the year ending 31st of December 2017. Calculate the cost of goods sold. And again, you can ignore the VAT. So let's run through the answer to this question then. So a trader operates with a gross sales margin of 16%. So we're going to highlight what we know. So we know that we're operating with a margin of 16. And they made sales of 78,700 in the year ending 31st of December 2017. And we want to calculate the cost of goods sold. So first of all, we know that we are going to be working with a margin, which means we need to base everything on sales. So if we're basing everything on sales, then sales must equal 100%. So 78,700 equals 100%. Our cost of sales, therefore, must equal 100 minus the margin that we're given, which in this question is 16%, and that equals 84%. So when we know that what value our cost of sales equals, we can work out that what our cost of sales is based on the sales figure and the percentage that we know the cost of sales represents. So then we're going to do our sales figure. We want to work out what 84% is of our sales. So again, you can divide by 100 times by 84, or you can use a decimal way like I do. So if you multiply that out, you will come to a cost of sales of 66,108. Then we need to check that what we've done is correct. So we need to work out our gross profit, which will equal 78,700, which is our sales, less our cost of sales. Gross profit will always equal your sales minus the cost of sales. So we're minusing 66,108, which equals 12,592. And then that is our gross profit in monetary terms. So if that's our gross profit in monetary terms, we can then go back and prove that our margin is correct. So we can then do our gross profit divided by the sales. Remember, we're basing everything on sales here because we're working with margin. Remember your in up here. So we divide it by our sales figure, times it by 100, and that comes out at 16%. So we can see that that 16% comes back to the 16%, so therefore our calculations must be correct. So let's move on to an example for markup. So a trader operates with a markup of 12% and sold products which cost $56,000 in year ending 13th of December 2017. Calculate the sales for the year. You can ignore that. So the key things to pick out: markup, 12% is what we're given, and we know that our cost of sales is 56,000. We need to calculate what our sales were. Okay, so first of all, let's go back to basics, and let's think about what we're representing here. So we're going up, so we're basing everything we're doing on cost of sales. So everything is being based on cost of sales, therefore it must equal 100%. So if our cost of sales equals 100%, we're going to be working with 56,000 as our 100%. Now we're told that we have a markup of 12%. So our sales is going to equal our 100% because it equals what it costs us to make those products plus our markup. So our actual sales is going to be 112% of the cost of sales. So as we know that our sales is going to be 112%, we can then do the calculation. So again, you can work out what 12% is of 56,000 and add it on, or you can work in the decimal form, which is 56,000 multiplied by 1.12, which is 112%. And that gives you a figure of 62,720, and that is our sales value. So now let's go back and prove it. So if we have a sales figure, let's work out our gross profit. Our gross profit equals 62,720 minus what our cost of sales was, which was 56,000, and that equals 6720, and that's our gross profit. So now let's put it back into the markup formula. So our markup formula is the gross profit divided by our cost of sales, multiply that out by 100, and that comes back to 12%. So you start off here, because you're using markup, you start off with your cost of sales equaling 100%. So to work out your sales, you need to add them together because you're going up on top of cost of sales. So cost of sales plus your markup, and so your sales equal 112%. You then have to work that into your cost of sales to work out what your monetary figure is. So your total sales then is 62,720. and then we can work it back. So we know what our sales figure is, we take away what it's cost us to make those sales, which gives us our total gross profit. Put that back into our markup formula, our gross profit divided by our cost of sales times by 100, and that comes back to the 12% that we were given. So it's really good in both of these. You can see how you can actually come back and check your answers. So let's have one to practice with them. Trader operates with a markup of 32% and sold products which cost $128,300 in the year ending 31st December 17. Calculate the sales for the year. You can ignore VAT. Just pause the video and have a go at this one yourselves. So let's run through this question. So a trader operates with a markup of 32%. So we're working with markup of 32 and sold products which cost $128,300 in the year ending 31st of December 2017. Calculate the sales for the year, and you can ignore that. So again, as I always suggest with questions, go back to the beginning and have a look at what you're given. So here's our up, which means we're basing everything on cost of sales. So if everything's being based on cost of sales, we know that the cost of sales must equal 100%. So 128,300 equals 100%. Our sales value, therefore, must equal 100% plus 32, which is our markup percentage. So our sales value is going to be 132% of our cost of sales. So work that into a formula. Again, you can work out what 32% is and add it on, or you can do the decimal way, which is the way I prefer to work. So 128,300 multiplied by 132%, which is 1.32, and that brings you out at a figure of 169,356. So once you've worked that out, always go back and put it back in so you can check that you do come back out at the right markup percentage. So first of all, we need to work out what our gross profit is. So we've got our new sales figure here. So we're going to use that 169,356. We're going to take off what we know our cost of sales is, 128,300, and that brings us to a gross profit of 41,056. So let's do our markup. So our markup is our gross profit divided by our cost of sales, multiply it by 100, and that brings you back to your 32%. That comes back to your 32% in your question, so that you know you've got your figures correct. I really strongly recommend when you're doing a question like this, you do always put it back into the formulae that you learn. As I say, you're probably unlikely to get an exam question that will ask you what the percentage is for markup or margin. They're more likely to sort of get you to work it backwards by being given a percentage for markup or margin. Okay, so one thing we need to look out for then when we're looking at our exam questions is about VAT. Now, VAT may or may not be included in your question, and it's really important you identify when it is, because you need to make sure you take it out, as the margin is only going to be based on your net sales. So I just want to take you through a question where you have to do additional calculation in order to work out what the cost of sales is. So here we have a question. A trader operates with a gross profit margin of 27% and made a total sales of 205,300 in year ending 31st December 2017. They are VAT registered and they charge at the standard rate. Calculate the cost of sales for the year. So the important things in here are, we've got a margin, 27%. Their total sales was 205,300 and they are VAT registered. And we're also told that they charge at the standard rate. Now at the start of your exam you will be told what the standard rate of VAT is, so we're just going to work on what it currently is in the UK of 20%. So let's work through this question. So first of all, we're working with margin, so everything gets based on sales. But before we can decide what figure makes up our 100%, we need to work out what the net figure is of this. And people have various different ways of working out their net figure for VAT. So please use your preferred method, but you should get back to the answer that I've got here. So my method of doing it, as I like to work with decimals, is to do the gross figure, 205,300, and I want to divide that by 1.2, which gives me a net figure of 171,083.33. So there's a little bit of rounding going on in this question, but it doesn't affect the outcome. So there's our gross figure, 205,300 divided by 1.2, or whichever your preferred method is of working out what the net value is for VAT. And we come back to the net of 171,083.33. So it's now going to be this figure that we need to work with. At this point, you need to forget about this. Don't worry about this figure in your question at all now. If you start using that figure, your answers are going to go wrong. We're only worried about our net sales figure. So let's start working it through. So let's start at the very beginning. There's our sales, and that equals 100%. Our cost of sales, therefore, is we need to take our margin off of it. So our cost of sales is only going to be 100% minus, sorry, ignore that little line there, minus the 27%, and that makes it 73% of the sales figure. So we're then going to work that out and again, please use your preferred method. Can divide by 100 times by 73 if you wish, which is the same as doing it this, except this is just decimal. When you do that, you come out to a figure for cost of sales of 124,890.83. So again, now let's go back and prove this. Work out our gross profit. So our gross profit is going to be our net sales. Remember, we're forgetting about this now. Our net sales, 171,083.33, less our cost of sales figure. This is now our cost of sales. So minus that. Which gives us a gross profit of £46,192.50. So now let's put that back into our margin calculation. So our margin equals our gross profit divided by our sales, our net sales, so forget about VAT, multiply it out by 100, and that brings you back to a margin of 27%. So forget about your VAT inclusive sales here. You don't want to use that apart from working out what your net sales is. So work that out and only use that figure going forward in your calculations. Again, you just work out what percentage of that is going to be your cost of sales. Work out your cost of sales figure, and then to prove it, pop it back into your formula and you know that your figures are correct. Okay, so my final thoughts then for this presentation. Markup and margin is an area that can be confusing to start with, but please don't be put off by it. This is one of those areas that you just need to do little baby steps and make sure that you review all of your earlier learning before moving on to the next stage. So just like we've done in this presentation, I always found breaking the learning up into smaller pieces makes it more manageable. So start off by using the basic formulas. Start off by understanding, finding a way to connect. I find the pictures is a really good way for me to connect with what I'm doing. So try and find a way for you that works for you and use it continuously, and then it will become so much easier for you to remember. When you're faced with a question, try and take a step back. Pull out the individual key elements of the questions you need for your calculations. Some of the questions might be a little bit wordy. When you get into the exam, you're going to feel, a little bit more under pressure than you do perhaps when you're sitting at home studying. So just take a couple of seconds, stop, take a breath, look at the question, and write down on your scrap bit of paper that you can request in the exam room, write down the key bits that you're going to need. What gross profit margin are you given, or what markup are you given, what cost of sales are you given, sales, anything like that. Write it down, because then you'll be able to have it directly in front of you when you want to start doing your calculations to answer the question. Before answering, look at if you're given markup or margin. And again, perhaps draw out the pictures that we've done in this presentation to jog your memory. Anything that will help you just take that little step back and just really sort of solidify, clarify it in your mind what it is that you're looking for and what you need to base your calculations on. And ultimately, with any type of exam, any area in AAT, just time, practice and more practice is key. Especially go through as many exam style questions as you can, because the wording can be different. So you don't want to go into an exam expecting it to be worded in one way, but then it's worded ever so slightly differently. Because this will only really cause you to be even more stressed in the exam environment. So just make sure you get as many questions in as you can. Take a breath, remember the key concepts, break it down bit by bit, and remember, just do baby steps, and you will get there. Good luck, and thank you for watching.